Welcome to Lanisha's Life Lessons and Lattes. This season, we are talking all things faith, and I have brought to you an all millennial guest lineup discussing topics most concerning to the millennial in this modern day and time. Today, we are talking about tithing and sacrificial giving. If you are in the church culture, if you are a believer in Christ, you know that this is a very important staple in the faith is giving. And so I'm joined here with one of my peers, someone that I deeply admire. I just think his brain is encyclopedic. He is a walking wealth of knowledge, someone well studied, a theologian for sure, and for sure will be someone senior pastor sooner than later. I'm convinced of it. I am joined here with good friend and colleague, Richard Hughes. Richard, thank you so much for joining us.
Good to be here. Good to be. Thank you for the invitation.
Absolutely. Well, thank you for accepting. And you are joining us from South Carolina.
From Charlotte, North Carolina.
Oh, goodness. You just told me this before the recording. Okay. North Carolina, you guys.
Yeah.
Joining us from North Carolina. Richard, thank you once again for being here. Let's go ahead and jump into it because I'm sure you have a lot to teach us on the topic. Giving. A lot of people are turned off immediately by Christianity, and even the practice of organized religion when it comes to passing around the basket and giving. Why do you think that is? Why do you think so many people can be turned off by that?
Well, there's a couple different reasons. First of all, some people critique the church in particular that we ask for too much. There's a running joke, but I mean it's the truth. It's like we take up one offering, then we take up another offering, then we take up another offering, and then another one. Like, some churches do that. And so they're like, okay, we're asking too much and all of that. Another reason is because of, which I'm sure we'll discuss later at some point, there's a mistrust with how many churches handle church funds. We can over spiritualize the act of giving and the need to tithe and everything. But then when it comes to actually practically managing and administrating the offerings that we collect and the money that we give to the church, many churches do a bad job of doing that. And there's in a lot of churches a lack of accountability to say, okay, I'm giving my money. I trust you, but I also want to know where my money is going, how it's being spent, how it's being used, and even at some point, in what way can I benefit by being a member of this church, a financially giving member of this church? So I think there's a lot of mistrust there.
Very good. I would co-sign on that as well. I think a lot of people are turned off with the idea of giving because they may not be sure what they're giving to.
Mm-hmm.
You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
So let's backtrack a little bit for someone that may be new to the faith or maybe they're not really familiar with organized religion. What is tithing? What is this tithing word that we speak of, Mr. Hughes?
So tithing is an act of giving where we give a tenth of our earnings. It doesn't necessarily have to be financial all the time, which again, I'm sure we'll discuss at some point. It can be you're tithing some of your time. It could be you're tithing something that's valuable to you. It can be, a commodity or whatever that can be used. But biblically speaking, tithing was how this Israelite community, these formerly enslaved people, would see their giving to God as a means of also creating a sustainable community. So like in Malachi chapter 3, which is if you've been in church at any point in your life, I'm sure you've heard Malachi chapter 3, will a man rob God? And an ironic part about that, a lot of pastors have quoted that scripture, will a man rob God? And at the same time are robbing God and God's people. But I digress on that. But we'll quote that. But in that scripture in Malachi chapter 3, it says, bring the tithes to the storehouse. So there's a place that we are to bring our tithes, which in our context would be the church. But in that context, it was more like a farm or a barn at a farm, because these were agricultural folks. So for them, tithing wasn't necessarily about shoving out dollars and cents. It was actually giving a portion of their earnings through agriculture. So sometimes it would be their cattle, it would be some of their crops and everything, because most of the laws in the Old Testament had to do with giving those type of things for sacrificial purposes. And so
Right.
that's another part of it. Tithing is a sacrifice.
Yeah.
Um, and so we would give, and through giving to that storehouse, Malachi then says, God says through Malachi, bring the tithes to the storehouse so that there will be meat in my house. So the meat would come and it would stack up. So the more they gave, the more it would stack up. But it wasn't for the purpose of just bringing it here to sit. It was for the purpose of being used for sacrificial purposes through rituals and ceremonies that they would have at the temple. But
Yes.
also it was to also help the poor as well. So think about it like this. I saw someone make this illustration: tithing, taking away money, and just let's say we're just using groceries. Let's say you have 10 boxes of cereal. You set aside one. That's the tenth, right?
Yes.
10%. You set aside one box of cereal. Let's say you have 10 cans of, let's say, green beans. You set one can of green beans aside and put it in the storehouse. Let's say you have 10 jugs of sweet tea. You set that one jug of sweet tea aside. So every time you get income, you're setting aside those pieces. And over time, what it will do, that will stack up, it'll grow. And the point of that was to help do the mission of God through the church and through the temple at that time. But also, whenever you had a lack and you needed something, God would provide out of the tithe that you gave. So
Yeah.
if I fell on hard times, I shouldn't have to worry because I've given a portion to God, and that's how God will then, as Malachi goes on to say, open up the window of heaven and pour you out a blessing so that you won't have room enough to receive it, right?
Yes.
That that blessing that is getting poured out of that room or that window comes from the tithe that you gave to God. It's supposed to. And so a lot of churches miss the mark whenever they don't adequately help the members, because another thing, a lot of people don't really understand what it means to be a member, because what has happened is church has went from being a community oriented place or gathering, which is what it really is. Ecclesia is a gathering of people. um it's gone from a community oriented place where people gather to a corporate commodity that we pay for. And so
Woo.
we pay for a product, but we're not really getting something in return. That's why back in the day, a lot of churches had a thing called the benevolence fund. And the benevolence fund was for anybody who fell on hard times, and the church would be able to help them out whenever they needed it. The church would buy them groceries. The church would even help them pay their rent. The church would, provide daycare for their children if they were in between jobs and trying to find a job, things like that.
Right.
And the way they were able to fund that benevolent fund was through the tithes. So they would give back what they have given. But then aside from that, one last point on that, tithing for a Christian is how we participate in God's work on earth. So that's how, of course, there's a saying for those of us who have worked in a church that it takes money to do ministry. That is 100% correct,
Yes.
and it's 100% correct in other ways that it takes other things to do ministry as well. But it does take money to do ministry,
Yeah.
and that is how we're able to go out and make a difference in society. But I think one of the issues, particularly with Black people in the church, is that whenever you look at the base of who our membership is, predominantly Black churches are made up of Black people.
Yeah.
And if Black people experience racial wealth inequalities in society, Black churches will also be at a disproportion to white churches. So the money we get in a Black church
That's
will
good.
not be the same that the money a white church gets, because a Black church has employees and white churches have employers. And there's a difference in those two salaries. So if I have a church full of employees, I'm taking money from, and I know all Black people aren't poor, but I'll just say this: I'm getting money from poor people to give back to poor people. Many
Yeah.
white churches are getting money from rich people so that they can turn around and do something, which is a colonized version of ministry, to poor people, right? And so I often say, think about a church, a Black church with 1,500 members. will have less money than a white church with 150 members.
My
That's
goodness.
very possible. And so a lot of people critique the church because they see, oh, well, they have a lot of people going to that church and everything. Yeah, but most of the people in there aren't giving and they're not able to give. And then sometimes they don't understand how to give, how to tithe. Because tithing is also something that has to be taught not just in the church, but in your home as well. It has to be modeled.
Absolutely.
It has to be modeled. And it's just not there with a lot of black families because, for what it's worth, we don't really have it to give a tenth of our income. Now, they may drop in a Baptist dollar or something else every now and then, but it won't be a consistent tenth of their income. And
That's
so
it.
that's another thing that we must consider as people critique the church. Now, of course, I understand I'm not going to let everybody off the hook because, like I said, there's been a lot of churches that have taken advantage of members. There's been a lot of churches that have abused folks financially and everything.
Yes.
And so that is a very real thing. But we also have to keep in mind that other aspect of it as well.
You said a lot. A lot. Let me zero in on some of these points, right? So you talked about, you put a value to it. There is a standard at which we are to give, and that was, as you told us, a tenth. A tenth. All right. I just want to make that clear. We are to give
Mm-hmm.
a tenth of all of our gain.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that that is, I think even within that, that shows the generosity of God because he only asked for 10% and not 90%. He
Mm-hmm.
only asked for the sacrifice of 10% and he lets us keep the other 90%.
Mm-hmm.
But it very well could have been no, you give me 90 and then you try your best to live on 10%.
Right.
Um, you also talked about how church has become a corporate commodity. Whoa.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So, for me, the way that I look at church, I think that church is a place where you come to get fed. It is where you receive the word of God, the inspired living word of God. And if you're under good leadership, it is being broken down in digestible ways where you can really understand it and
Mm-hmm.
it's applicable. It's able to be practiced in your life in a very clear way. You walk out of the sanctuary understanding, okay, this is how I apply this. And so you could not go to Red Lobster. You could not go to Brian's Steakhouse. You couldn't go to a nice dining experience, partake in lovely, food, and then get up and leave the check at the table. That's not how it works. But a lot of times that's how people use the church. They come, they get fed, they get a spiritual feeding, and then they leave the check for someone else to pay.
Mm-hmm.
And another thing that you said, Richard, this is also good. Um, you talked about how it's not taught in the home, it has to be modeled. Sacrificial giving is something that I think you have to be intentional about because if not, I think out of our nature as humans, we are focused towards self preservation, right? So we're thinking about like,
Me
what
first.
me first.
Mm-hmm.
Yes, me first. And so I definitely think you have to be socialized. It is a virtue that has to be cultivated where you say like no because if you are practicing any religion where it's me first, that's the wrong religion. God's not in that at all. And let me ask you this. When did you become a tither? I don't even really have to ask, are you? I'm trusting that you are.
Right.
When did you become a tither, Richard?
I started like
Be
tithing.
honest.
Right. I started tithing maybe I was about like 19, 20 years. Well, actually a little bit before that. I'll say consistent tithing. So I would do stuff
Yeah.
like as a teenager, whenever I had it, I would do it. Sometimes I
Yes.
didn't do it, but like that's when I would say I started. But I started consistently tithing when I was in undergrad. Um, when I was finally able to make consistent income and things. And one thing that got me, there was a statement my mentor, and you know who he is, Dr. Cosby had made in staff meeting one time, and that convicted the heck out of me, was that he
Okay.
said, for those of us who are on staff, he just said it like this: if you live by the tithe, you must tithe. And so for me, I have seen firsthand, I have a personal experience of church one of the churches I grew up in, where folks have once again abused the members financially, And a lot
Yes.
of folks don't even know that I know, but like I personally know people who should and could be in prison to this day because of it, embezzlements and all that stuff. And for me, because I know the power that the church has, I don't like when some of the critiques that people make are very valid and we feel that. So I'm like, what can we do from the inside to make sure that anytime they bring up that critique, it's no longer valid? And so for me, one of those ways was if I'm a leader in this church, I have to tithe. And then I have to have financial integrity as I administrate in my position, whether it's a senior pastor, whether it's a youth pastor, whatever. I have to embody that integrity so that I can re-win the trust of people. Right.
Yeah.
Um, so yeah, so like that was for me. And the way I've saw things work out, it's a sacrifice. There's times where you may not want to do it, but then there'll be some times when you're just out there and you just find out like God will just take care of you. I know this sounds uber spiritual to some folk. Some folk just want it to be very practical, but there really are some ways that like God can bless you by your obedience and by your sacrifice that you can't even explain.
Absolutely.
So yeah, and
Bookmark
it's
that.
just trusting God. It's just trusting God because at the end of the day, it all belongs to God anyway. And
Yes.
so first off, it's God allows you, like you said, to have much more than we give to him.
Yeah.
And like I said, if all of it belongs to him, that's the favor of God that he lets you even operate with the 90. And when you think about it, I started thinking about it like in this term. If when I get my check, the United States government has already took a cut from me,
Yeah.
and the United States government barely does anything for me as a black person in America, but yet they're consistently getting my money, then I don't have an issue giving God what I owe him when
Ooh,
God has done much more for me than the United States government ever will do.
that's so good.
So,
That is so good. Okay, and I'll follow up with that with my experience. So
mm,
much like you, right? I like how you said, well, consistently, I became a steady tither at this age. For me, it didn't happen until about a year ago.
mhm,
So my mindset was, I will give if I have it. And that's how most of us are raised, right? I
mhm,
would like to say most people are good people,
mhm,
but the good is under what circumstance. And so the circumstance for me was, well, if I have it, I'll have it to give. And I think some people transfer that mentality into like sacrificial giving and tithing, which if it's a sacrifice, it's supposed to cost you something. If it costs you nothing, it means nothing to God.
mhm,
But for me, I operated with if I have it to give, then I'll pay my tithe. And so when I first started tithing, my first job ever was at McDonald's. And this is back when there was no pay online, there was the color
mhm,
coded envelopes, right? So
mhm,
I was really consistent with that. And I was very proud to do it. But then I went to college and money got real tight. And I was like, I
mhm.
can't afford. That was
Right,
my mentality, is I cannot afford to tithe. And
right.
another thing that I thought was, well, if church is this big body of believers and all of them come from different financial statuses, then the people who have money, the older generation, they can carry the bulk of the bills.
Mhm,
I'm just starting out, like they'll be fine. They won't notice my little, $20 isn't there for my $200 McDonald's check or whatever. But as I started being around other like-minded believers, or not like-minded, because really they were way more developed than me because they were taught this as they were growing up, I realized how much I did not trust God. And
mhm,
essentially, that's what it is. If you are looking at your money and saying, I cannot afford to give you a sacrifice, God, you are not trusting God. And
mhm,
you are robbing God because, Richard, you called it. It already belongs to him anyway. He's
mhm,
just trusting what you will do with the portion. And one thing that I have learned as I have continued to develop is what you prioritize first with your portions is what you worship.
yeah.
So if you get your paycheck and God and your tithe is not the first thing on your mind, you're worshiping something else. Is
Mhm,
it that Apple bill for
right.
that nice phone that you upgraded to? Is it that lace front unit? Is it the PS5? But your money supports, what you believe. And so I will say I did see a difference
Mm-hmm.
and just how protected and blessed with abundance I felt when I did not make tithing a budget item. It when it no longer became an elective for me and it was just the standard that I was supposed to operate as a Christian, I
Mm-hmm.
really felt like my life was proofed with an extra layer of like his grace. Have you ever felt that?
Oh yeah, absolutely, absolutely, and it gives you a sense of structure as well, structure and discipline.
Yes,
Um, because that's something like you said, it's gonna have to come out regardless, right?
regardless.
Just like our taxes, it's gonna come out regardless, and so it helps you to keep in mind, okay, well, all right, I know this is what I'm getting paid, but this is what's going to come out. And so after all this comes out, this is what I will have left.
Yeah,
So let me plan my budget around what I have left and not the entire amount. You see,
yeah,
because whenever you do it like that, like it helps you, like I said, to stay structured, to stay disciplined, helps you to save really. Because
yeah,
then like there's in your mind, like I know I have to do this. Like consider it another bill, right? I know I have to pay this, as often either every Sunday or once a month. Some people do it like that. They break it up or they'll just dump, the whole thing at one time, stuff like that. I actually had somebody at the church I was an interim at in Greensboro, North Carolina. They would pay their tithes once a year, but it was like the whole year's amount. That's
yeah,
a lot of money to be dumping at one time. But I was like, hey, if you could do it like that, then do it.
yeah.
But it just depends on where you are. But like I said, I have never seen a time where whenever I prioritize tithing, that I would just be throwing money at random stuff. I noticed that whenever I didn't tithe, I would get broke faster, or like
Ooh,
my check would run out much faster than when I did. Because
yes.
when I did, I'm like, oh, okay, that came out like, oh, like this what I got left. Like let me not go to Chick-fil-A every day. Let me just do Monday, Wednesday, and Friday. That's it. So, so
Yeah. And I love what you said. You felt like your check would run out a lot faster. I heard it put this way before. When you withhold from God, there will be holes in your pocket.
mhm.
When you withhold from God, there will be holes in your pocket.
Yeah.
But trust God, step out on faith, believe in Him. And it's not giving with the idea that I'm going to get something in return. That's not how we lead. But
Mhm.
the reality is, God takes care of His children. He does. It is His pleasure to do so. And so when you give and you make those sacrifices to God, what you are doing is opening up the door for him to bless you even more. And the
Mhm.
thing is, you never know what that blessing is going to look like. It could be your car being surviving that flat tire that it was supposed to get. It could be your washing
Yeah.
machine going out when it was supposed to.
Mhm.
It could be someone saying random insurance check that comes in the mail like, oh, you overpaid, and it's like, I overpaid $200 when I did not
Yeah.
overpay. But things like that happen. For me, a story that I'll tell really quickly, a testimony. I'm letting y'all in my business right now. Okay. I never, ever, ever get my state taxes back. I always owe money for some reason.
Mhm.
And this past year, like when I got consistent and I was like, no, I'm going to give, like, no matter what, it's not an elective. That was the first time ever that I got
Yeah.
my state taxes back. And when I opened the mail, I was just like, well, when I checked my bank account, I was like, this isn't right. Like somebody made an error, a big error.
Yeah.
So when I saw that it actually went through this year, I just looked up at God and I was like, all
Uh-huh.
right, God, I see how you work.
Oh yeah. Oh yeah.
So that was just like a nice confirmation in the spirit, like, child, I got you. When you try to budget with your insights and you trying to figure things out on your own, you're gonna have holes in your pocket. You're gonna have holes in your bank account.
Mhm.
Okay, let me ask you this, Richard. Is monetary, and you already touched on it, but let's just
Mhm.
dive in a little deeper. Is monetary donation the only way to prove your sacrifice to God? Because what if someone isn't working? What if they don't have a steady income? What if they don't have that layer of privilege at the moment? How
Mhm.
could they give?
Right. There's definitely multiple ways to tithe because we often get bogged down on, whether or not it's just money or what's the word I'm looking for? Just like the legality of the matter
Yeah,
that, oh, tithing is just money. Like, no, it's just the principle
yeah,
that you're to give a tenth of whatever it is that you have. If it's money for you, then cool. But if you don't have money, okay, how much time do you have, and what are you spending your time on? Right? Is it just, doing everything for yourself and to build yourself up? Yeah, self love is the best love, but at the same time, you can give some of that time to God as well.
Yeah.
How can you, give some of your time in the name of God to help somebody else, to serve in a ministerial capacity, to volunteer, or whatever it is, stuff like that. A lot of musicians tithe their talents, because it's not just showing up on Sunday to play, but they're sacrificing throughout the week to rehearse A on their own, and then B as a group, C with the choir, and that's a lot of time. A lot of ministers, folks who preach, we sacrifice a lot of time putting together the word, and
Absolutely.
so there's a sacrifice there, and we tithe our time along with our treasures and everything else, but there are multiple ways of doing it. I'll just say that there's multiple ways of doing it.
That's good. You actually said something that's going to lead us into a point that will culminate at it at the end. Tithing with your talent. Ooh, that's good. That is so good. Okay. Um, for someone that may just be tuning in, thank you so much for joining Lanisha's Life Lessons and Lattes. This season, season 3, we're talking all things matters in the faith. And this episode, we're talking about tithing and sacrificial giving. Richard, for someone who's new to the faith and they're just like, you guys are talking this really good stuff, but like real simply, why is giving back so important? What is the fundamental principle that you can leave them with about giving?
It's one of the ways that we show God that we're thankful for what He's given us,
Mm-hmm.
and it's another way that we are able to participate with the mission that God has for the earth.
Ooh, that's good.
Hmm.
All right. I love how you said that. I don't think I need to add anything to that. It's a
Yeah.
way to participate with the mission God has for us here on earth. That
Hmm.
is so good. And I think that that even hits home with the holidays coming up.
Hmm.
So maybe you don't have the biggest bank account. God's not concerned about that at all. He is worried about your heart. You can still give up your time. You can serve. You can even donate your efforts to an organization that maybe has the resources, but you just go and you be the arm power, the manpower, with what you can give.
Hmm.
All right. My last question for you. All right, you touched on this as well, but what about the fear of your hard earned money being misappropriated? If someone really has a real fear of that, they say, hey, I want to give back, but hey, I've been church hurt, I've been scorned, I've seen some things that I don't think God would be pleased with. What would you say to them if they're worried about, hey, I want to give, I want to show God my obedience, but I'm not sure about giving to the church? What would you say to that?
I would say, really, and a lot of people in churches may not like the start of this answer because it's not what we want to hear. And even if it's the church I'm a part of, it's not the church that they want to hear, but it's just the truth. If you don't trust the church, that's pretty much a sign you probably shouldn't be there.
Yeah.
Um, and I would say find a church that you can trust. But if you feel like you don't trust that church, but something can change, it's a church. You can approach people. I know there's, some people in church on their positions and everything. There's for some reason a bit of fear that's built up around them to make them feel like they're unapproachable and everything. But like, nah, like they are human beings just like you, and you are giving to that church. And every church, as an organization, is supposed to have legally should have measures in place for financial accountability. That's actually what trustees are for. And so, if there's those measures in place for financial accountability and integrity, and you feel as if the accountability and integrity is just not there, you got to go through those proper channels. And like I said, this is, tough to say as a church leader, but I mean, real talk, sometimes a lawsuit might be necessary. I hate to say that, but I say that to say I've seen so many instances where, like I said, I know for a fact there's some people I know, distant cousins, in fact. They don't know that I know it. I've seen documents. And I know, like, Like, if the right person blew the whistle, you would be in prison right now.
Yes.
And, you know, it's just, there's got to be the accountability there. And I feel like if you're in a church and holding your leaders accountable brings you, if holding your leaders accountable brings you fear, you shouldn't be at that church.
Oh, that's good.
That's just my, and that's from a person who is a minister. I've served in an interim role, served on pastoral staff and everything,
Yeah.
and I've gone to seminary to study church administration and everything. And like I said earlier, my main motivation and how I do ministry is, okay, how can I clean up the image and reputation of the church so that people can see, just like I see, how powerful it can really be.
Yeah.
And so, you know, that has led me to have these hard conversations and say the stuff that a lot of people don't want to say. And some people will say, "Well, Hughes, you shouldn't have said that." A lot of them, they're gonna be upset with you. I'm like, well, if it upsets you, then you're probably doing something wrong and illegal that you shouldn't be doing. But if it doesn't upset you, then you shouldn't have. Or if it didn't offend you or upset you, you should have no problem with it, right? If
Yeah.
you're doing what you're supposed to do. But I will say that, stuff like that just bothers me because I know what the church can be in the community, the things that it can do. And for something as petty as money to get in the way of people wanting to trust A, the church, but B, to trust God, that's an issue to me. That's an issue amongst other issues, but that is an issue.
You guys, tinkering at the bottom is his Instagram. I know you guys are going to follow him after that answer. He is someone that stands for truth and justice, and you can see he is passionate about God and church and its people. And Richard, I commend you, because a lot of young men would not be bold enough to say such a statement on such a platform.
Mhm.
So to you, I thank you for your integrity. I think that even right now, you're setting an example of integrity for people far beyond your years. So thank you for that.
I appreciate it. I appreciate it.
All right. And if I had to answer the question, I think Richard, he just stood right in truth. I'm gonna put a little honey on mine, and I'm gonna say this. Um, I've learned not to be so consumed with what happens once you give it, because if you send it off with the right intention,
Right.
that's what God is most concerned about. So I know a lot of people worry themselves from the point of deposit to, like, where is it going, what is it going toward, is it really going toward what it was advertised for? But you will literally stress yourself out, and you will take the joy out of giving. And what has helped me is just understanding that God sees all things, God presides over it all. So don't you worry about it. If someone is acting in deceit, it will be brought to light. You
Hmm.
don't worry about that. It absolutely will be brought to light.
Yeah.
It's not your
Oh, yeah.
job to judge them. It's your job to give with a good heart and be obedient to what God says of you to do. And
Hmm.
another thing that helped me change my mindset is, if you're worrying about your hard earned money being misappropriated, what about the talents that God has given you that you misappropriate with
Right.
laziness, with idleness, with disbelief, or even with unwillingness? And so Richard talked about so brilliantly how we can tithe with our talents. You have gifts, you have seeds of promise that God has put in you, not for nothing. Do something with it, use it. There's a reason for it. You have purpose. You are fearfully and wonderfully made and created and designed, and there's nothing about you that is random or strange or by accident. You are a creation by the greatest of all time, the greatest artist of all time. So use your own talents as well.
That's it.
Richard, is there anything that you would like to impart to someone who may be saying, I really want to get into this giving thing, but, like, I'm not really sure about my heart posture? Anything you can impart to them?
I would say, just like I tell people in making a big decision in other areas of life, sometimes you just got to jump in and go for it. Because then if you wait until circumstances are right, at that point it kind of ceases being a sacrifice and it's more of a just a routine, right? Which it can still be sacrificial in the context of a routine when done right, but for the most part, it's still routine. But if you feel like, well, I want to, but my heart's not right, well, sometimes our heart isn't right on a lot of things.
Yeah,
It could be the job you go to, your heart may not be right, but you still going. And so, same thing in this. And so, and then even, if you say, well, like we had discussed earlier, well, I don't feel like I'm in a financial position to start tithing or to start giving. Well, start where you can. Get yourself in the habit to where it becomes routine, and then it builds up that structure and discipline for you. And then you will discover, oh, well, I had it to give this entire time. I just didn't know how.
absolutely.
So I would just say, just go for it
Yeah,
and
I had it.
be in prayer and allow the Holy Spirit to open up your heart, but go for it.
Yeah. I think that was a very skillful and masterful answer, Richard. I like that. You found out that you had it to give all along. You just didn't know how. And
Mm-hmm.
I think you throw yourself out there and you trust God. I think, that's pretty much it. For me, one thing that has helped my heart posture is just very blatantly understanding that when you refuse to tithe, you are stealing from God. You are being a thief. Nobody likes a thief. If we know when Thanksgiving comes, don't we lock up the valuables when we know that we hosting and there's a thief coming?
That's it.
Because we don't trust,
Right.
that person in our intimate space.
Mm.
And with all the things that God gives you, how he blesses you, how you can go to sleep at night and you can get a sweet sleep, and you're not worrying about your body not functioning properly as you sleep, like, because God watches over you through and through. Just simple things like that, just getting in the car, going to get gas, and then being able to return home. Simple grace like that, you know, he keeps you. So why wouldn't you just give to him the
Yeah.
10% that he asked for? That's all he asked for. And so
Mm-hmm.
I realized that I'm being a thief in the kingdom by not giving and making it a budget item that is elective. That changed the game for me. And I give whenever I can
Yeah.
now.
Oh yeah.
I give
Oh yeah.
whenever I can.
That's it. That's it.
Richard, thank you so much for being here with us today. We learned so much from you. You guys, he is one to watch in the ministry. His influence among peers and even amongst those older than him. He tilts the room when he walks in, you guys, and I'm not kidding. Powerful, powerful man of God. Thank you so much for joining us for talking about tithing and sacrificial giving. I believe that generationally, a seed definitely was planted tonight. Someone's heart changed, and someone will be trusting God, and they'll be stepping out on faith, and they will begin their journey of tithing. And we're so happy to be a part of that. You guys, if you have been rocking with me for all 6 episodes, I say thank you so much. Thank you, thank you, thank you for liking, for sharing, for subscribing, for following this journey. This is year 3. We have one more episode left, and it is the finale, and we will be talking about perseverance. We know that as believers, there will be moments where we will be challenged with long suffering. And so we will culminate this season series talking about perseverance on Thanksgiving Day. You guys, may God bless you. May you have double portion in your life, and may God open up the floodgates to bless you abundantly. Richard, again, thank you so much for being here. God bless you guys. Until next time.